Hi, welcome to another next episode of Can We Talk? I'm Darcy Stanford here at the LearningRx in Southern Minnesota, and this is the second part of this series on trauma. Last week we talked about what are some of the things with chronic associated with chronic trauma, what it might look like, and stress that the chronic trauma brings on, and the different kinds of stress and how those impact a child's brain development and their development and their overall well-being. Now, when we're talking about trauma is something that's a little more long-term. It tends to have overlapping experiences. A lot of states have really moved to the phrase adverse childhood experiences. Different states might have different things that they use to measure that. Minnesota has done its own ACEs study, if you will. Philadelphia kind of started it. They had a broader range of categories. Minnesota's narrowed it down. And what they have found is about 55% of all children in Minnesota have at least one ACEs adverse childhood experience that they've had. And of those, 87% had more than that overlapped. And when you think of an adverse childhood experience, such as a parent who suffers with mental health issues, it's not a stretch to imagine that there was some sort of possibly neglect or emotional abuse that happened. If the parent had some severe depression, there might have been days that they laid in bed and didn't tend to their children's needs, and the kids didn't know from day to day if there would be food or who was going to take care of them. Those types of things. And so that's what it means by overlapping and interrelated, that they had more than one. And so it's very much connected. And the ways that it can impact the neurological development and biology of chronic trauma is in a couple different ways. So we talked last week about elevated stress hormones and the altered biochemistry and what stress can do to the brain and the development in especially the early development of children. There's suppression of brain development, and it actually alters the brain structure. Children who have experienced trauma, chronic trauma in particular, have a reduced hippocampus and an enlarged overactive amygdala. They also can have a lower intracranial and cerebral volume, a compromised immune system, and the impact of all of those is worse if the trauma was complex, if it happened early, if there was a long duration of trauma, and if the child has a diagnosis of PTSD. And so what does it mean when we talk about a reduced hippocampus or an enlarged amygdala? Is that the instinct for protection and defense moves our thinking into being a reactive rather than thinking slowly and more thoughtful and taking a more critical approach. So again, it's just a reactive response to things instead of stepping back and really giving it thought before you take any actions. And increased stress and anxiety can also impair motor performance, research has shown. And that Goldman in 2006 research found that when you have issues and handicaps with the amygdala, it impacts our ability for learning with things like for holding information and working memory, for reacting flexibly and creatively, and for focusing attention at will, and for planning and organizing effectively. And if you have ever worked with children with trauma, you probably be like, yep, that's exactly some of the things they struggle with, in addition to the social emotional issues and deficiencies that they have and the behaviors that come out of it. So all of those things kind of are going to contribute to the behaviors that they have. So, one of the things that has really impacted me as I've become trained more in ACEs and trauma-informed practices in schools is just reframing, just thinking when a child is having behaviors or issues with you, instead of thinking in your mind, what's wrong with you? Reframing that to be more like, what happened to you? What happened to them that made them react the way they did? They may not know what all their triggers are. The body can remember stress that the mind doesn't. And they might not have any idea why they're acting or why they responded the way that they did. And so even asking them, what is wrong with you? Why did you do that? They probably have no idea. And so really reframing how you think The other thing that I have to try to remind myself and say to myself is they're not giving you a hard time, or they're not giving me a hard time, they're having a hard time. And to figure out why it is they're having that hard time. Some of it with the trauma, the impact it has on their ability to learn in school, compounded with just the emotional stress and reaction that they're having, can make it seem like they're giving you even more of a hard time when really it's just them struggling. And so when you're looking at working memory, these are kids that are going to struggle with getting homework done, remembering what they need to do, following multi step directions, comprehension, whether that comes from reading or math comprehension, but struggling to remain able to remember those things. The ability to stay organized can come in it might look in a variety of ways. They might struggle to organize with physical items like papers and homework. It might struggle to organize their life at home, so their room is not organized. They may struggle with organizing their thoughts, whether it's verbally, speaking and sharing stories, or it might be in writing, if they in writing papers and writing things down, that they really seem like they jump all over. So being able to stay organized. And last week we talked a little bit on how trauma and stress affects selective attention as well as working memory. So it's in multiple research has proven that those things are impacted in the brain from stress, and stress contributes to trauma, or trauma contributes to stress. So being aware of that, understanding where the learning challenges are, again, thinking about it as a what happened to you when you get those behaviors, and thinking about those underlying cognitive skills that are just adding to the trouble and struggle that the children are having. So, next week, we will be talking with Amanda Stark. She is the executive director of Rachel's Light here in Owatonna, which is transitional housing for women and children. And so, with her experience, she's going to share with us her experience on trauma, on how it has manifested, how she has seen it manifest itself from children through to adulthood. And then we will also be visiting in a couple weeks with a educator who is also the mother of children who experienced trauma when they were young, and she's going to share what she has seen, what she has dealt with, and what are some of the positive steps they have taken to help their child with trauma. So thank you for joining me, and we will see you next week for another episode of Can We Talk. Bye bye.